Welcome back, friends, and we're excited to have you along with us for another Tuesday live edition of In the Trenches. We'll get to 7 from 77 in just a little bit, but what I want to let you know, if you've missed anything, already out, the Michigan radio replay of Inside Michigan Football is there. Sharon Moore, along with Brian Jean-Marie, Jimmy Rolder, were my guests on Monday night. Defend the Block is out as well, and Brian Bush, who's the host of that one. His guest this week was Will Cheddar. So excited to have those. Basketball season, even though it's still September, it's only one day left, but it is right around the corner. Still to come, Conquering Heroes. We're going to be joined by women's soccer head coach Jennifer Klein. Always great to catch up with her. A couple of big wins this past week and weekend. In the Trenches, the Thursday edition will be my keys to the game, as well as my locker room speech. I know everybody is excited about that. I certainly get excited about it. And then Saturday, after we put the beat down on the Badgers, we will have the post-game edition for available on the podcast as well. So those are the offerings that we have on MGoBlue Podcast. At this time, I want to bring in my partner, Mr. Brian Bush. Brian, how you been?
Rested, refreshed from the bye?
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
come on. Now, you did not go to the concert, correct?
No, I did not.
I
no.
didn't either, but boy, the pictures, some of the
Oh, yeah.
videos we saw, pretty cool, pretty special. I prefer football, but that was pretty neat.
It was really cool. My daughter was there. She had good seats. She went with the rowing team. And the response that I got from her was that, one, it was a great show, great performance by all the artists. And second, it was a great showing of fans. What was the total? It was 112,400 and change.
Yeah, a record for a concert ever. Apparently merchandise was great. So really cool stuff, even if we didn't make it.
Yes.
That's quite all right.
Yeah, the show went on without us.
It did, and big reason why. Some great sports this weekend, a lot of fun. We'll talk about it all. We've got on the video side Michael Cohen of Fox Sports joining us around 11:50 this morning to share what his perspective is on a really interesting point of the college football season. But let's talk about the bye week. Let's talk about where this team is, John. Number one on our 7 from 77. What's the impact from last week moving forward? How did you handle bye weeks when you played football?
Well, the impact on the positive side of things is what we've heard from the coaches, what we've heard from the players, is some of those guys that have, major contributors in the first 4 games. If they had any bumps, bruises, dings, maybe Giovanni Al-Hadi is back. You get some guys back on defense. You're more at full strength. And this year we know we've got the 2 bye weeks, so there's some built-in recovery time. The improvement at practice. A lot of young players are getting a lot of reps, guys that we may have seen a little bit of, some guys we've not seen of, and maybe not even until next year, but they got some quality reps in some of those competitive practices as well. And then there's always that risk of coming out of a bye week and trying to find your rhythm again, whether it's offense, defense, or special teams. So that's going to be up to the coaches to make sure the practices are, at a certain level, at a certain tempo, so that the players come back on Saturday at noon, ready to hit the ground running and picking up where they left off in Lincoln. And in regards to my bye weeks, I was such a great student.
Sure.
It was all focused on academics.
Yes.
So making sure the academics are all taken care of. And making sure that training table didn't miss one of its most important participants.
Yeah, do you
myself.
do you have the phone numbers of some of those old professors we can reach out to and just double check on that educational piece?
No, they are all, well, not all of them. Most of them are retired or no longer with us.
Fair enough.
It's been a while.
On that positive note, let's go to number 2 on our 7 from 77. It's been a really interesting year for Michigan because already several young players have become pretty well known among Michigan fans. Cole Sullivan at linebacker, considering all that he had to contend with competition-wise in that linebacker group, he's made a huge impact, forced 3 turnovers so far. How about Jaden Sanders, who you'll hear from on our radio pregame show coming up on Saturday? He's been outstanding in the secondary as a freshman who was not here as an early enrollee. And there are others, Jake Warnera on the offensive line, more by necessity, but he's stepped up well. Big 2 weeks for younger guys to try to go from not playing in meaningful snaps to maybe getting some meaningful snaps, or from some of the guys who we've seen as fringe rotation pieces, offensively or defensively, who can make that big jump into key contributors. Give fans a player or two you have your eye on as somebody who maybe utilized this 2 weeks to maybe in the month of October become that household name like Sullivan, Sanders, and others?
Well, I think Cole Sullivan is a great example where, yeah, there are great players in front of him, but if you can help this team win, if you can make plays, they're going to find ways to get you on the field. And, whether it's Jayshon Barham moves up, Cole Sullivan moves in. You're doing different things with Ernie. That's a great example. And, some other ones, Jaden Sanders, you never know when your number is going to be called. And it may be due to injury. And listening to the coaches, I think Jaden Sanders was going to get his opportunity no matter what, but he was moved into duty quickly because of injury. Some other guys that I think we're going to be talking more about, and I mentioned him, this guy in the pregame show against Nebraska. I thought it was going to be an opportunity for him, but I think as we get into the Big Ten season, you're going to see more of Andrew Marsh. I think he is a player, because of his speed, because of his ball skills, he's going to be a guy that I think is going to jump off the page as we get towards weeks 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way towards the end of the season. Jasper Parker, another guy defensively that we saw. Jasper Parker offensively, that it's going to be hard for him to break into that running back duo, but it's a long season. All of a sudden, somebody gets nicked up and maybe they don't take as many reps or they have to miss a game. You always got to have two guys. Jasper Parker, I think, is a guy that once he gets the opportunity is going to really explode onto the scene. And the third guy, I jumped ahead, Elijah Dotson. We saw the interception that he had against Central Michigan. Due to injury, I think that he will be a guy that we're going to see more of. He's earned that opportunity because he's gone in there, albeit against Central Michigan. He did have some reps against Nebraska as well. But you're going to see him be a guy that gets more and more time in that secondary.
More time for the preschool secondary, as Wink Martindale has talked about. But, hey, those preschoolers are making some big impacts. Before we continue on our 7 from 77, let's tell you a little bit about our presenting sponsor, not just of In the Trenches, but the 2025 Michigan football season and hundreds of sports teams across the Midwest, our friends at Meijer.
Yeah, Brian, we've talked about Meijer a lot. Our listeners can find more in the Meijer app. Plan, shop, save, and get deals made just for you. Plus, you can enjoy an even more personalized shopping experience with M-Perks. Check your M-Perks rewards, see favorites on sale, shop, and do so much more. And when fast and easy convenience is the key. Check out services like Shop and Scan and Meijer Home Delivery and Pickup. There's more in the Meijer app, so explore it, see what you're missing. Download the Meijer app to get started today, or learn more at Meijer.com/MPerks. That's Meijer is a proud presenting sponsor and fan of the 2025 Michigan football season.
All right, number 3 on our 7 from 77. If you missed the video portion of this stream last Tuesday, we still had one with the bye week, and John gave his kind of, quarter poll grades for Michigan football.
First marking period.
Correct, yes, again. All education.
First trimester.
Yes. Yeah. Well, no, hey, there's going to be 16 games. That's the key, remember.
We got to earn that.
We do.
So right now, regular season, first trimester.
Exactly. Yeah. Math, very important. But John gave his grades out. High marks for linebackers, lower marks for wide receivers and cornerbacks. I want to ask you this, John. October is a big month. We're going to talk about how unique this month is here shortly. But take out linebackers. You also had running backs, gave them an A-. Take those two out. What are the groups that you maybe expect to have A's in the month of October?
Well, I'll start with the defensive line. And it's just a little bit cheating because Jayshon Barham, Cole Sullivan are a part of that equation. Yeah. But when you look at, the ability of Wink to be able to use Derek Moore, TJ Guy on the same side because you've got Jayshon on one side. I think you're going to see more creative ways of getting after the quarterback. You're going to see one-on-one matchups, and I think you're going to win a lot of those one-on-one matchups. But I think you're starting to see this defensive line, and they've been really good at the start of the season of stopping the run. Now the question is, can you stop the run as well as the quarterback run? Now, we may not see a lot of that. In the coming weeks. You will see it against Michigan State in the month of October. So it's not the focal point of some of these offenses, but they are ways that these offenses will try and convert on some of those third downs. So that's where I really think this defensive front can take that next step. And if we're getting great pressure on the outside, the importance of those guys isn't necessarily to put pressure on the quarterbacks. We've seen it with Rayshawn Benny getting after the quarterback, but it is going to be to push the pocket. If they can push that pocket up front and put some of those centers and guards into the quarterback's lap, now all of a sudden the quarterback has one way of escaping. It's either right or left. It can't escape up in the pocket. and it puts them into the strength of this defensive front. So I think the defensive line is one of those groups, and I'm going to give you one that you probably didn't expect me to say, and this is somewhat grading on a curve because seniors are going to be graded much tougher than juniors, sophomores, and certainly freshmen. But I think the freshman quarterback, I think there's an opportunity for him in the month of October to get that A type of a grade. And it's not going to be, again, it's grading on a scale, but the quarterback, don't jeopardize possession of the ball. Making good decisions. That's really what he's going to be forced to do. And then it's playing within the game plan and playing within his abilities. When there's plays there to be made with his feet, take advantage of it. You know, you may not have a lot of called quarterback runs because I keep going back to what Sharon and even Chip Lindsey has talked about in regards to this offense operates best when Bryce Underwood is the quarterback. You want to make sure that he remains healthy, but you throw him out there, you tell him, play the game. There's going to be some called quarterback runs, but when things break down in the pocket, his ability to keep his eyes downfield, hit targets on the run, or to be able to just simply pick up first downs, I think there's a lot of room for growth. Now that he's got 4 games under his belt, 2 of those in hostile environments, you're going to have USC. That's going to be a game where he's going to have to go out there and produce. Wisconsin is a game where he should be very effective throwing the ball, running the ball. Michigan State in the middle of the month. All of these games, that's going to be another hostile environment where he's going to have to go to East Lansing and show that he's grown, certainly from what we saw in Norman to what we saw in Lincoln. And now that next step of taking on a rival in his home state against Michigan State.
I want you to hold that thought about what we're looking for in the future for Michigan in the month of October. It's important to break down, but I want to touch on Wisconsin as our number 4 on 7 from 77. What do you make of this situation? Wisconsin, such a proud Big Ten program here in the last 20, 30 years. They've almost always been kind of in that mix. They were, I think, the team to beat many years when the Big Ten West existed. Obviously, it was never quite as deep as the Big Ten East, but still, Wisconsin went to Indianapolis regularly. They were in the hunt for the college football playoff. Now they're 2-2, kind of feels like an identity crisis. What do you think of the Badgers for this matchup and just overall where the program is? It's in one of its worst spots we've seen in quite some time.
And I think part of it is the format of the Big Ten. Now that you don't have the Big Ten West, they were competing with Iowa, who is kind of in the same ballpark as Wisconsin right now. And you think about some of those teams in the Big Ten West, now all of a sudden they have to compete with Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, and now you throw in Oregon, Washington into the mix. It's an unbelievably tough conference, and throw in that a coaching change, a style change, that they went to the air raid offense. It didn't work. Now they're trying to get back to being big, tough, powerful, physical, and they're getting there. They're just not there yet. They've also been struck with some inopportune injuries where, last year, Game 1, you lose your quarterback for the entire season. This year, they lost a quarterback in Game 1. Now he's fighting to come back. Whenever you have that change at the quarterback position, it takes a little bit of time. When you have a change in concept and philosophy, now all of a sudden you need a little bit of a different style from your offensive line. They're developing that. They're just not there yet, and they're doing it at a time where it's extremely hard to go from either bottom or middle of the pack to top of the pack because the Big Ten is stacked with teams that are extremely good.
I will say, I wonder if early tenured hires, especially with what's happened in Indiana with Curt Cignetti. I mean, Indiana was picked to finish second last in the Big Ten last year. They went to the playoff. They just got another big road, probably the best road win of the Curt Cignetti era at Kinnick Stadium this past weekend. Has the Indiana effect maybe expedited other fans and athletic departments' expectations for hires? Because Luke Fickell, from all accounts, I thought it was going to be a really solid hire. He did an incredible job. He got Cincinnati to the playoff in the AAC, but they just haven't had the results.
Well, some of it's just simply recruiting, and it's not just recruiting in the traditional sense. Yeah, you need to be able to go out there and still recruit top talent, 4 or 5-star guys. You need to be able to develop that talent, but the whole clock has been sped up because of what Kirk did in regards to, he brought, 7 guys from JMU as a part of that offense along with his quarterback, so he was able to hit the ground running, and they had a very light schedule last year. Now this year, schedule's a little bit tougher, and they did have a big win. They put the smackdown on Illinois, And then, you get this big win in Iowa City, but it's really about investment. What are athletic departments willing to invest in their football program? Indiana has made part of that commitment. And so that's what you're going to get. Now it's up to teams like Wisconsin and Iowa, Michigan State. Some of these programs that, and obviously we're talking about new hires, so it's more Michigan State with Jonathan Smith.
Sure.
You've got to be able to invest in those transfers because players right now are literally going to go. There are some guys that are making the decision, hey, I want to go here because I want a degree from there. I feel like this is the coach that can develop me best to get to the NFL. A lot of players are making that decision solely on who is going to pay me the most. And if that is part of the equation, then it's not just the coach. It's the athletic department, and it's the donors, it's the boosters, it's the collectives. All of those things go into how quickly can you get a program from, like in Indiana, second, last in the Big Ten to a playoff contender.
And it doesn't have to be the fastest build ever. I think, take out what happened a couple weeks ago in Bloomington for Illinois, Brett Bielema has had a slow, steady, but an ascending build in Champaign. So it doesn't have to be, go from one of the worst programs in the league to a playoff appearance. But there hasn't been that slow ascend for Wisconsin that I think a lot of people expected.
But, I mean, the fan bases are going to become impatient.
Sure.
If you get blown out against Indiana, okay, what's Indiana doing that Illinois is not? And if Brett Bielema is taking too long, maybe he got it to a certain point, and now you want to bring in a guy. And I'm not saying his job is in jeopardy, but that is the impatience of fan bases right now, where you do see programs go from 0 to 60 overnight.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, back to more on Wisconsin with John's Keys to the Game audio-only edition on MGoBlue Podcasts, our Thursday afternoon edition of In the Trenches presented by Meyer. All right, number 5 on our 7 from 77. It's October now for Michigan starting this Saturday, and it's a fascinating month. Of course, through September, we all wanted the Wolverines to be 4-0, but with road games in Norman against still undefeated Oklahoma and then Lincoln, it felt like 3-1 would have been a solid foundation for this program to have, and they got there. Now October. It's a fascinating month because home against Wisconsin feels like it is the, quote, easiest of the 4. Got to play the games, got to show it on Saturday. I get all that. But with the next 3 being at USC, home against a Washington team that I don't think it did offense going against Ohio State, but defensively they showed some flashes against the Buckeyes, and then the rivalry trip up to East Lansing. It's a really interesting pivot point for Michigan this month because if they get through this month unscathed, the schedule in November opens up really well for Michigan to get to the game at 10-1. 3-1 sets up likely Michigan's win and in college football playoff type game against Ohio State coming up at the end of November. How do you look at the month of October, John? Give us the ranking of the games you are most to least worried about this month only.
Well, I mean, just in terms of these 4 games, it's the trip to USC, because we went out to Washington last year. Now, completely different teams on both sides, but you make that trip, 3 time zones, you're going to be starting, it's late, and maybe that plays in Michigan's favor this year. I don't know. I know that Michigan's going to do a couple of different things in terms of travel to try and change the outcome, or at least the ability to enter that game being more competitive than they were last year. So, but you go on the road to USC. It's a tough trip, and that's an explosive offense. Defensively, I'm not really sure. I got to do a deep dive into them, but sure. It's a hostile environment. It's a tough one to go into and win. So I think that would be the toughest of the 4. Number 2, I would put at Michigan State because, again, both of these games on the road.
Yep.
And it's a rivalry game. We know how much that means to the guys that grew up in this state, guys that have been here for 2, 3, 4 years. That's going to be an absolute slugfest. So, and we still have yet to figure out how good is USC, how good is Aiden Childs and this Michigan State offense compared to their defense. Both the teams seem to be struggling defensively, but I think both of those provide the biggest challenge in the month of October. Then you think about those 2 home games. I think Washington is a sneaky good team. Jed Fish has done a tremendous job of coaching those guys up. They don't make a lot of mistakes. That's going to be a game where you've got to take care of, dot the I's, cross the T's, do all those things so you give yourself the best chance to win. And then Wisconsin, and this is no disrespect to Wisconsin, of those 4 games, I just think it's, I don't want to say the easiest, but it's the most winnable game on the schedule. And if you come out of this, third of the season 4-0, like you mentioned, You've got Northwestern, you've got Purdue, you've got a couple of games in Maryland in the lead up to the game. I'm not going to call them all must-wins, but in the business of college football, if you lose one of these, then Ohio State becomes a must-win. If you win all of these and you win those other 3 games and you go in, can you lose that game? I'm not saying that we will. I'm not saying we want them to, but if you lose that one at 10-2 in the Big Ten, you're probably still a playoff team because you've gone to USC, you've gone to Lincoln, you've gone to East Lansing. You've made some trips and shown that you can win some games, but I just think a 10-2 Michigan is a team that will probably be a playoff team.
Yeah, tough to argue that, but again, we got to see how it all plays out with the other teams in college football. All right, we will break down some of the other really important Big Ten games coming up here on our 7 from 77. But we got a new partner for you on the podcast. They're going to be out at FanFest over near Pioneer High School this weekend. Our friends at My Choice Energy. John, tell our listeners and viewers about them.
You nailed it, Brian. A new partner. It's My Choice Energy, and they've got a question for you. Are you tired of your natural gas bill playing games with your budget? One month it's low, the other time it's high, it's through the roof. Stop the roller coaster ride. With My Choice Energy, you can lock in your natural gas rate and say goodbye to surprise price hikes. It's like an insurance policy for your energy bill. They're a part of the Foster Energy Services based in Richmond, and it's been there since 2002. Locally owned family business, and they've been helping residential and commercial customers just like you and me take control of their energy costs. You still get one bill from your utility company, but now with a fixed gas supply rate from My Choice Energy. Lock in your rate today. Visit fostermychoice.com. That's fostermychoice.com.
All right, number 6 on our 7 from 77. Big Ten takeaways. How can we start anywhere else but the whiteout at Penn State? Oregon wins in overtime. And, man, Dan Lanning, his emotion, excitement, enthusiasm after the game, he's a wild dude. He's a fun dude. I appreciate what he brings to the table, and that was one heck of a football game. What's the bigger story, though? Is it Oregon winning, or is it Penn State losing?
Well, for me, it's always going to be Penn State losing. James Franklin lost his pom-poms in overtime. I don't know, he must have lost them somewhere on the sideline, but it's just typical of what James Franklin does. Yeah. You expect Dan Lanning to win big games like this. Now, he's not going to win every single one. They won the national championship last year, but they do what it takes, and sometimes it's creative coaching, creative game management, as we saw last year. Dan Lanning has every single base covered, and I just don't believe that James Franklin does. He doesn't seem to get the best out of his players, and we've talked a lot about Drew Allar and Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, their running back duo, the talent that they have on that offensive line. I don't know how they host one of those games because their record in hosting the whiteout, I think they're 2-8 now, 3-8. 8-2, and now 8-3. It just, James Franklin has that hiccup where he just can't get his team to win those top 6 matchups.
I don't know what Penn State does. They still get to go to Ohio State, so they still have a chance to rescue all of this. That's the unique aspect of a 12-team playoff. Their season is not over. But boy, if they end up losing to Oregon, losing to Ohio State, sitting there at 10-2, I think they got a couple other games that have some oomph to it. But it might truly be maybe a 10-2 Michigan resume versus a 10-2 Penn State resume for a playoff spot. It's just tough to fathom that every year when everybody came back pretty much, they have a loaded roster. And we kind of were worried about Penn State's just overall because of how uninspiring the first few games were.
And I mean, let's go back to 23 when you had Blake Corum and the offensive line. Yeah. So many guys come back and it was unfinished business. And then last year, Ohio State stole that, and it was unfinished business for a lot of those guys. They go on to win a national title. So why wouldn't the guys at Penn State think, well, if we want to come back and be the veteran group and come back for unfinished business, well, this is our year. It doesn't mean they're out. They still have opportunity because, as you mentioned, they will go to Columbus. They'll have other big games. But I don't know how it is that James Franklin coached teams can't find a way to win those games. But whether it's coaching errors or it's player error or it's there's just always seems to be something that holds them back. And if they lose both big games that are on their schedule, it does. Now you start comparing 10-2 games. And I know the committee is as human as you and I are. They're not supposed to hold records or a historical perspective. But if you're looking at let's just say teams coached by Sharon Moore. Now, last year as a head coach, right, not great, but you had a big win against Ohio State at the end of the
Forget the coach.
year.
It's just the brand. It's just the
Well,
school.
yeah.
It's
Yeah, but
tough
Penn
to
State's
separate.
It is tough to separate the brands.
You're right.
But
I'm saying the brand's success recently.
right, but you look at the big time matchups, and Sharon Moore was able to find a way to get his team to beat Ohio State last year. Ohio State goes on to win a national title. They go to the bowl game. They get a big win against Alabama. And you can say whatever you want about bowl games, but then when he was head coach, it was a head-to-head win against Penn State. When he stepped in for Jim Harbaugh, it was another win against Ohio State. So he's got a track record of being able to win those big games. Penn State doesn't have that track record. There's just not that feel. So, yeah, they'll try and, as much as they can, keep those extra talking points out of it, but it always seeps into your thinking. If we allow Penn State in, are they just going to lose another big game? If we allow Michigan in, is it going to be do we have the possibility for an instant classic?
Yeah. Next 2 weeks at UCLA should be a win. Home against Northwestern should be a win. Then they go to Kinnick to face Iowa before a bye week and then hosting Ohio State and Indiana back-to-back weeks. They got to go 10-2. 9-3 is not going to get it done with that schedule, especially if all the losses come to the teams with a pulse on their schedule. Also, we mentioned Ohio State. They take care of business in Seattle, 24-6 over the Huskies. Takeaways from that game.
Julian Sampson continues to get better. He's the young guy. We talked about it when they faced Texas at the beginning of the season. It wasn't an offensive outbreak, but he did what he had to do to help win that game. And every step along the way, you can see things that he's doing about being able to get to third and fourth progressions. He's doing a much better job when he gets off his spot. Instead of being in the pocket, he gets off his spot. He still finds it. He's got some tremendous talent downfield to throw the ball to, but it's also a team that is learning how to run the ball more efficiently. And if you pair that with a quarterback that is continuing to improve, and he was a 5-star recruit, first at Alabama, then at Ohio State, really impressed with the steps that they're taking this season.
We mentioned the big win for Indiana at Iowa, 20-15. By the way, if you gamble on sports, look away from that final play. Oh my gosh, that is, man. Oh, there's bad beats, and then there's that. Between that and then the Illinois at the horn win over USC with a game-winning field goal. Takeaways from Indiana, Illinois, obviously two very different ends of the spectrum 2 weeks ago, both earning narrow wins this past weekend.
Well, when you take it on the chin like Illinois did against Indiana, it can be tough, especially going on the road and having to. Well, that was actually
in Champaign. Yep.
But no matter what, when you take one on the chin like that, it's really tough to recover that quickly. And USC is a program that's going to score a lot of points. I thought that Illinois did a tremendous job of recovering and trying to put a bad performance in front of them and using it as motivation to go out there and play well. That field goal at the end of the game, it's as exciting as it gets. So we learned a lot about both those programs. And then when you think about Indiana, going to Kinnick Stadium, and we've seen Ohio State lose there. We'll probably see Penn State lose there in a couple of weeks. Michigan has gone there and lost. It is a very tough place to go play. And so for Indiana to go in there, I think, you kind of nailed it. It is the biggest road win that Kurt Cignetti has had in his short tenure there in Bloomington.
And there haven't been many truly big ones for them. They'll have a few coming up here. They've got a much tougher schedule this year than last. We'll be curious to watch it this weekend. Big Ten-wise, pretty bland schedule. The only game that is within a touchdown in terms of the spread is Washington at Maryland. Does anything catch your eye outside of what the Wolverines will do?
Not really. Obviously, we're always going to be watching the Spartans and who they play because we got them coming up. It's going to be a rival. We're always keeping an eye on them, see what type of adjustments they're making defensively. Everybody, we're going to be keeping an eye on things that are going around, but there's no must-see TV in the Big Ten.
All right, number 7 on our 7 from 77. Normally we do top 25 breakdown, but we've got Fox Sports' Michael Cohen joining momentarily on the video side, so we will hold off some of the reaction to other conferences there. I want to talk about Rod Moore. He came back 2 weeks ago, his first play since the national championship game in January of 2024. He will be the audio-only guest on the podcast feed. If you're watching on video, catch it on Wednesday, MGoBlue Podcasts with John Jansen. What's the realistic ceiling for him this season, and how does he enhance this Michigan secondary?
Well, he enhances it not just by what he physically do, but what he does of being that coach on the field. And when you've got a player like him in the secondary, where, go back to what Wink has talked, it's a very young, immature secondary, and you put a player like that on the field. And sometimes it's just, hey, before the snap of the ball, you look over to Rod, and he is directing traffic from the back end there. That's going to be a huge asset to this team with so many young players playing in the secondary. And then you've got a guy like Ernie at the linebacker position, a guy like Rayshawn at the defensive tackle position. You've got very experienced, smart, veteran players that you would expect this defense to always be in the right spot at the right time. Doesn't mean that they're not going to make mistakes, but so, in terms of the knowledge and the coachability of being able to make adjustments on the field and not have to come to the sidelines, make adjustments, and then go back out there, it's going to be an extremely high level. Him as a player, that's a different matter, because I think there's going to be an adjustment period for him of getting comfortable being on the field, reacting at game speed, feeling game hits. And when you listen to the audio side of things, you'll get a chance to hear some of the challenges that he's going through, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. There are times where you got to be in the pile and you got to get twisted up. You're going to have to make maybe the same cut where he was breaking on a play, and you'll have these visions of, this is what happened when I got hurt, and now all of a sudden I'm being asked to do that again. And just doing that and then coming out healthy, you build a little bit more confidence. Then you do it a second, a third, a fourth time, and eventually it becomes second nature. But there's always that little bit in the back of your mind that says, if I do this, am I going to cost myself another year and a half of rehab? So I think it's more of a mental and emotional hurdle than it is physically for him.
All right, great stuff with Rod Moore. That's the audio interview coming up here on In the Trenches. On the video side, we'll have some questions and comments to bring up, including our guy, Salute RGS, saying what's good. LW, is Indiana finally a football school now? We'll find out October 11th at Autzen Stadium, Indiana at Oregon. And then, hey, if they're in the top 10, they will, like you mentioned, win at Penn State on November the 8th. That's the big key there. Mm-hmm. Just have a single-digit number in front of you. And then David saying whiskey going down this weekend. Also, we're going to beat Wisconsin. So, eloquent.
Yes. Yeah.
There was some whiskey that went down at the Big House on Saturday as well. All right. Always great to have our friend Michael Cohen stop by from Fox Sports. Looking comfy, cozy. Oh, it's a beautiful day there for you, Michael. What's up, buddy?
How are you guys? It's great to be with you as always.
It's good to see you again. And I know, are you going to be in town for the matchup this weekend?
Not this weekend, but I think I might get out there for the Washington game, and then, of course, I'll be out there for the Ohio State game, so I'm looking forward to seeing you guys soon.
All right, maybe a little potential hint there for start time for Washington. I know John's got his fingers crossed. Yeah. If Michael's here, John's happy about the kickoff time. I assure you of that. I want to start with your perspective of Michigan. Haven't seen them live yet this year, but from a national standpoint, Michigan hasn't necessarily been talked a ton about. But we were talking a little bit earlier about how the schedule does potentially open up a path for Michigan to take care of business in October, maybe just kind of getting ready for Ohio State at the end of November with a chance to go to the Big Ten championship game, or at worst, it'd be a play-in for the college football playoff. What have been your takeaways from Michigan through 4 games?
Well, I think there's 3 things that kind of jump out to me. The first was me, like everybody else, I wanted to see what Bryce Underwood looked like and how he would be deployed. And so far, we've kind of seen 2 different versions of that. We've seen the first couple of games where it was all passing and not a lot of running. And then we've seen what he did against Central Michigan and against Nebraska, where he was able to really use his legs. And that added a new element. And I think if you look around the country this year and you see what John Mateer did at Oklahoma, although he's hurt right now, what Trinidad Chambliss is doing at Ole Miss, what Marcel Reed is doing at Texas A&M. These schools that have mobile quarterbacks that have a little wiggle to them, there's 3 of them in the top 6 right now. And so I'm curious to see what Underwood looks like as the season progresses and how much he's involved in the running game. So that was the first thing that jumped out to me. The second thing is I've just been really impressed with how physical the defense is. I feel like it's a very, like, they want to lay the lumber. And I don't think there's always a lot of teams that really want to hit you the way that Michigan seems to want to hit you. I think that starts obviously with Wink Martindale and the mentality that he's able to instill in those guys. So the physicality on that side of the ball has been really impressive, and I think it goes beyond players like Brandon Hillman. He's obviously a tone setter for them, but I think there's a lot of guys now that really are hitting hard, and it kind of reminds me of when you hear coaches say in the NFL, like, we want our team to feel like they played you on Sunday 4 or 5 or 6 days later. And I kind of think that's what it feels like to play Michigan's defense right now. And then the third thing is what you ended your introduction with, Brian, which is that if they can get through, not looking past Wisconsin, but also kind of looking past Wisconsin, if they can get through that game at USC, I think the schedule sets up pretty favorably for them to go on quite a run in the back half of the season, leading to, the ultimate game against Ohio State. So those are kind of my 3 takeaways. Underwood, what he's going to look like, the defense being really, really physical, and then the schedule setting up quite favorably for them as we come down the stretch.
Well, you mentioned that game against USC, and with the non-conference, it's kind of hard to figure out, okay, what are some of these Big Ten teams, what are some of the teams across the country, but what do you make of USC? Last year, our experience was you mentioned the physicalness of Michigan's defense. They weren't a physical front on either side of the ball. What do you make of USC, their second year in the Big Ten?
Yeah, so I watched that game against Illinois really closely last week. I was on Fox. I had to follow that one and write about it. And I was very curious to see what USC would do a week after seeing what Indiana did to Illinois, a little bit of transitive property football, if there is such a thing. And I thought for a USC defense that was ranked first in the country or tied for first in sacks coming into that game, that they were going to be able to generate some pressure against an offensive line from Illinois that has really struggled a little bit this season despite bringing back all 5 starters. And what you saw in that game was the inability to stop the run, especially on the interior. Illinois just decided we're going to bang the ball between the tackles until you stop us, and USC couldn't stop them down the stretch. So I had been a little bit higher on USC, perhaps a bit naively thinking that they had rounded the corner a little bit, but when they were unable to match the physicality of a team like Illinois that itself couldn't match the physicality of Indiana the week prior, that really soured me a little bit on where things stand with the Trojans. So I would think that with the physicality I mentioned on Michigan's defense and the way that obviously Sharon Moore likes his team to play offensively, that the Wolverines will go into the Coliseum thinking we can win the line of scrimmage. And Michigan teams that win the line of scrimmage, as you guys have seen up close the last handful of years, they pretty much win most of the time in the games when they're getting the better of it in the trenches.
I don't want to look past this weekend's game, but certainly when you talk Wisconsin, Michael, it's more in the grand context of where the program is, what it might look like if Luke Fickell can't turn things around this season with a brutal schedule that they have and some tough injury luck early on. What catches your eye about this matchup and just where Wisconsin's program is right now?
Yeah, I'll start with Wisconsin overall. I think, I was looking back at it this morning, and Luke Fickell's tenure, they basically haven't been healthy at the quarterback position in any of the seasons since he's taken over. They went out and they really wanted Tanner Mordecai to be that guy in the first season. It didn't work out play-wise. It was up and down, and then he had injuries late in the year. Last year, of course, they had Tyler Van Dyke, who they thought was going to be their starting quarterback. He goes down with a torn ACL against Alabama in the second or third game. He's out for the year. And then this year, Billy Edwards Jr. coming in from Maryland, he sprains his knee in the second quarter of their opening game, comes back this past weekend to play a few snaps, but Luke Fickell acknowledges that was a little bit of desperation. It was too early. We don't even know if he's going to be healthy now this week because he couldn't finish the game against the Terrapins. So it's really hard for me to get a grasp of where this program stands, considering how difficult it's been for them at the quarterback position. But putting that aside, the thing that concerns me the most about Wisconsin, I think, is recruiting. I don't think they're recruiting at the level that I expected them to. given how charismatic and how successful Fickle had been in getting good players from the Midwest when he was at a smaller program in Cincinnati. It just hasn't really translated, I don't think, over to what he's doing at Wisconsin. And of course, they've changed offensive coordinators, they've changed offensive philosophies, going from the more air raid style to now wanting to run it a little bit more. So it just feels like a program that's just confused at the moment. And so when I look at what this weekend will be like, I remember I saw Danny O'Neil, if he ends up being the starting quarterback, I saw him out at the Elite 11 a couple of years ago when he was out there committed to Colorado at the time. And I mean, he was so much smaller physically than all these other guys. They list him at 6 foot, but John, as you know, a quarterback that's listed at 6 foot probably isn't 6 feet tall. He's not very strong. He's slender. I mean, he made good decisions in the first 2 games, but then when he played against power conference opponents the last 2 weeks, he threw 3 times as many interceptions as touchdowns. So I just think it's a program that is really in the thick of it right now. And as you noted correctly, Brian, and very astutely, their schedule is probably the most difficult of anybody in the Big Ten this season. Their month of October alone is brutal. And I just don't see how it gets any better before it maybe bottoms out in the next couple of months.
Yeah, it's at Wisconsin next week, home against Ohio State, at Oregon. I mean, that is, whew, and they still got at Indiana, home against Illinois in November. My goodness.
Yeah, I mean, it does get in here, but staying in the Big Ten with the win that Oregon had in Happy Valley in the whiteout, and Ohio State being 4-0, what's the hierarchy for you in the Big Ten, and maybe give us your top 3 or 4 teams?
Yeah, well, this is a chance for me to plug my weekly Big Ten power rankings, John. So thank you very much. Yeah,
FoxSports.com.
Yeah, we had, I put Oregon at number 1 for the first time. I had them leapfrogging Ohio State. I just thought the way that they played in that environment, the poise that Dante Moore displayed, the team looking completely unfazed and unrattled by what is unquestionably one of the toughest environments in college football was extremely impressive to me. And I just think the speed that they have at all positions, the depth that they have at all positions, it's just been a little bit more impressive thus far than what Ohio State has done. Now, I'm not saying the win against Texas doesn't count for anything because that's an awesome win. And I think going out to Washington and beating a team that was on a 22-game home winning streak is a lot harder than people gave them credit for, because I actually think Washington is a pretty good team and might win 8 or 9 games by the time this is all said and done. But I just think going on the road and winning at Penn State and winning the way that they did, controlling that game for essentially 55 minutes until the last 5 minutes or so when Penn State rallied to force overtime was extremely impressive. And then in my third position, I have Indiana. I thought that win at Kinnick Stadium was so gutsy. I just remember after that final touchdown where Mendoza hit Surratt on that slant where it was the catch and run, the look on Mendoza's face as he was celebrating and pointing to the sky, it looked like he was about to cry. And it was because I think of the physical beating he took from Iowa's defense. I mean, everybody knows Phil Parker is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, but he kind of changed things up against Indiana. They blitzed Mendoza on 70% of his dropbacks, which is a huge number. And he had to stand in there and take it and take hit after hit and deliver the ball. And he did it. And so even though his numbers at the end weren't that good, I was really, really impressed with the way he handled that game and how he made the big throws when he needed to. So I'm very high on Indiana. And as you teased in the opener there, Brian, that big game against Oregon on the 11th, I'll be fortunate enough to get out there for that one, my first trip to Autzen Stadium. So I'm really excited to see how that shakes out between 2 teams that are guaranteed to be undefeated because they're both coming off a bye week.
You always have to have the bye week before Oregon, Indiana. That's Big Ten football at its finest. I put Michael's X account on the stream. Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana, Penn State, and Michigan currently his top 5 in the Big Ten. I want to get your thoughts on Penn State, on James Franklin, because in a game like that, oftentimes the losing team is just as much of a story as the winning team. And because the story has just been the same over and over for James Franklin, it almost feels quicksand-esque where, yeah, Penn State's had a lot of success. They've won a lot of games under James Franklin. But if not this year, when, right?
Yeah, it's a great question and a great point. And I think there's a little bit of chicken and egg to it. Is it a James Franklin problem? Is it a Drew Aller problem? Is it both? Where does Andy Kotelnicki fit into this? And I think The answer is obviously the buck stops with James Franklin. He's the head coach, but I think there are pieces of both of those things, the Drew Aller side of it and the Andy Kotelnicki side of it, that are just not lining up right now. And when you look at Drew Aller, his completion percentage continues to drop and drop and drop. And for a quarterback who has started 30 plus career games and is now a senior and is facing the end of his career at the end of this season, you would not expect the numbers to be declining the way that they are. And I think it's because of a little bit of a square peg round hole situation with the type of quarterback he is and the type of offense that Kotelnicki is trying to run. And there was a quote from James Franklin, I can't remember if it was after the Oregon game or at his press conference on Monday of this week, but he essentially said he thinks the offense is at its best when they can use Drew Aller as a bit of a runner. They can do some zone read stuff. They can do some speed sweep stuff. They can get him outside the pocket. And I kept thinking to myself, is that really when Drew Aller is at his best? Because I think when Drew Aller is at his best, it's when he's standing in the pocket, he can put his back foot in the ground, and he can drive forward and throw it downfield. And it almost felt like the quote that Franklin had was describing Bo Pribula, who they let walk and go to Missouri as the starting quarterback. So I think if you look at Andy Kotelnicki's system and when he had the most success at Kansas, it was when he had guys that could move, whether that was Jalen Daniels or Jason Bean at quarterback. And that's just not Drew Aller. And so it's not working right now. Now, as we saw last season, when Ohio State went out to Oregon and lost, they completely reshuffled the way that they wanted to rush the passer after that game, reorganized their defense, built it back up, and won the national title. Now, do I think Penn State's going to win it all? No, but to suggest that their season is over because of one subpar performance against Oregon is not fair either. However, the one caveat is they still have to play at Ohio State, which I don't really have a lot of confidence that they're going to win that game based on how they played against Oregon, and they still have to host Indiana. And if they were to lose both of those games and be a 3-loss team where they didn't really beat any ranked opponents, that's not good enough to get you in the playoff. And I think it's enough to at least have a conversation about what the future is like with James Franklin. And I say that not knowing what his buyout situation is off the top of my head. But if they were to bring back this much talent and spend this much money and have 3 losses, I think you have to at least begin to have the conversation of, is this what the ceiling is under James Franklin?
And frankly, because they didn't schedule a non-conference game with a pulse, if they're 10-2, I don't know how deserving. It'll all depend on everything else. It's a bad spot.
It is. Now let's talk about the Buckeyes a little bit. What have you learned about the Buckeyes? Julian Sayin as quarterback, but I think more importantly their defense. It's been very good to this point. We're looking at opponents trying to measure how good. What have you seen from them?
Yeah, I think the defense has been a pleasant surprise for me. I actually thought there was a possibility that the defense could take a bit of a step back, at least in the first half of the season, not only because of all the talent they lost in terms of guys being drafted to the NFL. I mean, they lost both edge rushers, both interior defensive linemen. They lost a couple of players from the secondary that were all drafted. But they were also bringing in a defensive coordinator in Matt Patricia, who hadn't coached in college since the early 2000s when he was a graduate assistant at Syracuse, and had never really worked with guys this age that may or may not be able to handle the complexities of an NFL defense, let alone the complexities of a defense that he learned from Bill Belichick, who was noted as one of the best game-by-game defensive game planners that there was in the NFL. And so I've been extremely impressed with the way that the defense has played through the first few weeks. And the only real lingering question I had was, did they have any potential difference makers at the edge rusher position, guys that when it's 3rd and long, you can count on them to win and get around the edge and, beat a guy, whatever it takes to get to the quarterback. And you started to see in this past game against Washington, Caden Curry had 3 sacks. Caden McDonald, I know he's an interior guy, but he had 2 sacks as well. And so you're starting to see the pressure mount a little bit more. As for Julian Sayin, I think it's very much highly efficient game manager mode for him right now. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're playing into the fact that their defense is so good that Julian doesn't have to do anything over the top or ridiculous or go out and win the game by himself. It's a lot of short completions, screens, a lot of underneath throws, catch and run opportunities for their athletes, and it's working just fine. And I think he's handling it just fine. So this is a winning recipe, I think, for them. How far it takes them in the postseason, I'm not quite sure, because it stands to reason that eventually Julian will have to make a few more throws, difficult throws per game than he is right now. But at the moment, they've got a really nice blend of an offense that doesn't make mistakes and is efficient enough with a defense that might be the best in the country. And that's good enough to win a lot of games.
Got a few more minutes with Michael Cohen of Fox Sports. I'll keep it broad. Outside the Big Ten, what's a story or two, a team or two that stands out to you that has been fascinating so far in the first month plus of college football?
Yeah, I mean, I was really curious to see how Oklahoma would look, moving forward with John Mateer. So the storyline to me is how quickly he can come back from that broken bone in his throwing hand. He had surgery last week. They think it can be a short turnaround, as quickly as 3 or 4 weeks, because it was a minor procedure. But I thought when he was in there and playing at his best, he was arguably the best quarterback in the country with what he can do with his arms, with his arm and his legs. And so I think that Oklahoma defense is very, very good, as you guys got a chance to see in week 2. And so that's a team that I think could really make a push moving forward. And then, sort of broader than that, it's who is going to emerge from this SEC, I think. There was some thought that even with Georgia being a little bit, up and down the last couple of years, that with as good as they are at home, the road to the SEC title game still runs through Athens, but then they fall short against Alabama over the weekend. And ever since that season opening loss to Florida State, where Alabama got shellacked, they've looked really, really good with Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb starting to put together an offense that looks a lot more like what it looked like at Washington when they had success there. Obviously, Florida has stumbled, Texas has stumbled. So I'm just fascinated with what this SEC looks like because it's so wide open, and I'm trying very hard not to buy into Ole Miss because I've been burned by that in the past, but they look really, really good. And, Ferris State standing up at quarterback with Trinidad Chambliss, it's unbelievable. But that is a fascinating conference that I still don't quite know how good those teams are, but there's so many of them that are going to be in the mix that at this point, the one that intrigues me the most, unless Mateer comes back very quickly, is A&M. I think A&M is really, really good, and I think Marcel Reed has made some huge strides as a passer so that he doesn't have to just use his legs all the time. And that's going to be crazy to see how that league shakes out.
I want to just, in terms of the broad picture of college football, in the last few years, really the last decade, it's always been, okay, there's a dominant Alabama, or there's a dominant Georgia, or a Clemson, or even a Michigan in 23, Ohio State last year. It feels like this year it's wide open. Does it feel like there's just not that dominant team this year, and that there's probably 6, maybe 7 teams right now that got a legit shot, or maybe even more, at a national title?
Yeah, I think it's probably more, honestly. And I think it's really exciting for college football because, John, as you remember back when you were playing, going into the year where, there were probably, 3 or 4 teams sometimes that knew they had a realistic chance at being the best in the country. Mm-hmm. Now, with the format that we have, with the length of the season, with the forgiveness that comes into it, where you can lose a game or two and still grow as a program over the course of the season and have a chance to win it all, it's totally different. And I think the combination of the transfer portal, NIL, revenue sharing, and conference realignment has spread the talent across the country in ways that we haven't seen a lot lately. And the recruiting rankings and the transfer portal rankings are showing that, where teams like Texas Tech and Miami can, like it or not, you can go out and buy a very good team going into a certain season. And so I think it's more wide open than it's ever been. It's more exciting than it's ever been. And I think the 12-team playoff creates a scenario where at least 7 or 8 of those teams will probably think we have a chance to win it all, because the dominant programs aren't as dominant as they used to be, and the quote-unquote bad programs are nowhere near as bad as they used to be in the middle tiers and lower tiers of some of these leagues. So I think college football is as exciting now as it has ever been. And for all of the headaches that come with the NIL and the transfer portal, and I totally get it, it has spread things out in a way that makes the games much more interesting on a Saturday, in my opinion. And so I can't wait to see how this season unfolds.
Case in point, one of the biggest games of the weekend this weekend is Alabama-Vanderbilt. And next week is Indiana and Oregon. All right, I'm going to get you out on this because you have Oregon as number 1 in your Big Ten power rankings. If you had to say insert team here is the national champion favorite, who would you pick right now? Not holding you to it long term, but right now.
Right now, I would stick with the Ducks. I would stick with the Ducks. I think the speed that they have, the number of running backs that they have, the number of receivers that they have is really impressive. And so right now, coming off that win at Penn State, admitting that there's recency bias, I will absolutely stick with the Ducks.
And a follow-up to that, how much of that is not just their speed, their talent, how much of that's Dan Lanning and his ability to manage a game, coach a game, and get his team to play at a high level?
I think it's huge. I mean, look, I'm 5'9" and 140 pounds. I would never cut it in a uniform anywhere. But when I watch these coaches handle themselves, there are times when I look at Dan Lanning and I think, man, like, that's a guy that would get me fired up to go want to do things. And, you know, that's not the case with every high-level coach. Some guys just give off that energy, some guys don't. And watching the way that he was acting after that game with just how much it meant to him and the way he was sweating and just everything, it was like, man, there aren't a lot of guys that would get me more fired up to strap up the chin strap than that guy. And so I think it's a huge part of it. I think Lanning is understanding of how you be successful as a modern college football coach with all the things I just talked about in the previous answer about expanding the landscape. And I think that's huge. And I think he's in the right place with a program that embraces his willingness to be so bold and aggressive. And so I'm very, very high on Dan Lanning.
Michael Cohen of Fox Sports, looking forward to reading your reporting around Michigan, Wisconsin this week. Hopefully we'll see you here in a couple of weeks when the Huskies come to town. Always appreciate the insight, my friend.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
There's Michael Cohen. You can follow him on X down at the bottom of the screen. I give Dan Lanning a lot of credit for not cursing in that because he looked like he was cutting like a wrestling promo at the end of that game when he was doing the interview. The fact he didn't drop an F-bomb was truly Herculean.
Yeah. The filter is it was a high level of filter that he had.
As we've been showing you on the ticker down below, we've got a jam-packed week of content for you, as John alluded to off the top. And we've got our game day edition of Inside Michigan Football back Friday afternoon here on the YouTube channel and then in the stadium on Saturday. I know it doesn't resonate quite like some Michigan-Wisconsin games, but we've talked about it. Badgers and Wolverines at noon at the Big House. Outside of Wisconsin's record and the weather for Saturday, it feels like Big Ten football.
Yeah, it'll be a classic. So it'll be a lot of fun, and it's one of those Big Ten matchups that no matter where the programs are, those Big Ten faithful, and maybe you have to be 35 or 40 years old or above to appreciate the matchup. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see Wisconsin back in the Big House.
Can't wait for it. We will be with you again next week here on the live YouTube stream. Follow us, MGoBlue Podcasts, for all the audio content. For Jon, I'm Brian, and our entire crew, thanks so much for watching.